This story tells the harrowing true-to-life journey of Susan Peterson, Irshad Al-Shamari, an Australian woman whose love for a Saudi man leads her into a world of religious extremism, gender oppression, and relentless struggle across continents. Through vivid, emotionally charged storytelling, it exposes the raw realities faced by women like Susan, trapped between cultures and faiths, who endure unimaginable suffering, sacrifice, and resilience for the sake of their children. Ultimately, the narrative is both a searing indictment of injustice and a testament to the indomitable spirit of a mother fighting for the rights of her children. In For the Sake of My Children, Dr. A. Ahmed delivers a sweeping, harrowing novel that plunges readers into the tumultuous journey of Susan Peterson, an Australian woman whose love for a Saudi man leads her across continents, cultures, and faiths. What begins as a story of romance and idealism quickly unravels into a relentless struggle for survival, identity, and hope amid the darkest realities of religious extremism, gender oppression, and war. Through Susan's transformation into Irshad Al-Shamari, the novel exposes the raw, often brutal truths faced by women trapped between worlds, where love becomes sacrifice, motherhood demands impossible choices, and resilience is forged in the crucible of suffering. Based on true events, this epic narrative is both a searing indictment of injustice and a testament to the indomitable spirit of a mother fighting for her children's future. In the opening pages of For the Sake of My Children, Dr. A. Ahmed invites readers into the heart-wrenching odyssey of Susan Peterson, a woman whose life is torn apart by love, faith, and the unyielding grip of oppression. What begins as a hopeful romance between an Australian girl and a Saudi man spirals into a nightmare of isolation, violence, and unimaginable loss. Through Susan's transformation into Irshad Al-Shamari, we witness a mother's desperate fight to protect her children as she is swept from the warmth of her Sydney home into the suffocating darkness of religious extremism and war. Every page pulses with the agony of betrayal, the terror of captivity, and the fierce, unbreakable bond between a mother and her children. This is not just a story of survival, it is a raw, emotional testament to the power of hope, the cost of sacrifice, and the courage it takes to reclaim one's voice after being silenced by cruelty. Dr. Ahmed's novel is both an unflinching exposé of injustice and a deeply personal cry for dignity, freedom, and love in the face of overwhelming adversity. There are stories that break your heart, and there are stories that demand you pick up the pieces and do something with them. For the Sake of My Children is one such story, a raw, unflinching journey through love, loss, faith, and unimaginable endurance. Through the eyes of Susan Peterson, an Australian woman swept into a world of oppression, violence, and survival, we witness the agony of a mother's sacrifice and the indomitable spirit that refuses to be extinguished. Her path, from the warmth of a loving family in Sydney to the darkest corners of extremism and back, is a testament to the resilience of the human soul and the unbreakable bond between a mother and her children. As you turn these pages, let Susan's courage ignite your own. May her suffering move you not only to empathy, but to action, whether that means standing up for the voiceless, challenging injustice, or simply refusing to look away. Let us remember the words of Malala Yousafzai, when the whole world is silent, even one voice becomes powerful. May this story inspire you to be that voice for the sake of all our children and for the hope of a more just and compassionate world. There are moments in life when a single decision, made in the name of love, can unravel into a journey of unimaginable hardship and resilience. I remember the day I first held my newborn daughter in a cramped hospital room in Sydney, her tiny hand wrapped around my finger, her future bright and full of promise. I could never have imagined that, years later, I would be forced to fight for her very survival in a world that seemed determined to break us both. For the Sake of My Children is not just my story, it is the story of countless women whose voices have been silenced by fear, oppression, and violence, yet who continue to rise, driven by the fierce, unyielding love only a mother can know. Through every loss, every betrayal, and every act of courage, I discovered that hope is not a luxury, but a necessity, a light that refuses to be extinguished, even in the darkest of places. As you read these pages, I invite you not only to witness this journey, but to join it, to stand with those who cannot stand alone, to speak for those who have been silenced, and to believe, as I do, that change is possible when we refuse to give up. As Maya Angelou once said, I can be changed by what happens to me, but I refuse to be reduced by it. Let us, together, be the change that lifts others from despair to hope, from silence to song. Torn from the warmth of her Christian family, Susan, renamed Ershad, endures years of abuse, forced isolation, and the crushing weight of misogynistic laws in Saudi Arabia and Afghanistan. She witnesses and survives horrors that are all too real for millions of women: forced marriage, female genital mutilation, domestic violence, and the loss of her children to war and extremism. Yet, even as she is battered by loss and betrayal, Susan's spirit refuses to be extinguished. Her journey is not just a chronicle of pain, but a testament to the indomitable power of a mother's love and the human will to survive. Her story is not unique. According to the World Health Organization, over 200 million girls and women alive today have undergone female genital mutilation, and 1 in 3 women worldwide will experience physical or sexual violence in their lifetime. In many conflict zones, women and children are the first to suffer and the last to be heard. But Susan's voice rises above the silence, calling us to bear witness, to care, and to act. Let this book be a beacon of hope and a rallying cry. May we never turn away from the suffering of others, but instead, let their stories move us to compassion and action. As Susan herself reminds us, the only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good people to do nothing. Read, remember, and let your heart be moved, because change begins with the courage to care. About the author. Dr. A. Ahmed is an author and scholar with 5 university degrees, including a PhD in philosophy and comparative studies of religions. Born and raised as a Muslim, Dr. Ahmed's academic journey led him to convert to Christianity, and his writing is shaped by both personal experience and rigorous scholarship. He has authored 25 books, many focused on women's issues in Islamic societies and the roots of religious terrorism, and his works are available in both English and Arabic. Dr. Ahmed's unique perspective and fearless storytelling break through cultural and religious barriers, giving voice to the silenced and hope to the oppressed. Key themes of the novel include abuse and oppression of women. The novel exposes the physical, emotional, and sexual abuse suffered by women under interpretations of the Islamic main texts, the Quran and hadiths of the Prophet Muhammad, including female genital mutilation, child marriage, forced marriage, polygamy, and domestic violence. Religious extremism and terrorism. It critically examines how religious main texts and traditions can be used to justify terrorism, misogyny, and systemic oppression, showing the devastating impact on families and societies. Identity, faith, and transformation. The protagonist's journey is marked by religious conversion, loss, and ultimately a return to her original faith, reflecting the struggle for personal identity and spiritual truth amidst cultural and religious conflict. Motherhood and sacrifice. Central to the story is a mother's enduring love and the extreme sacrifices she makes to protect her children, even at the cost of her own safety and well-being. Resilience and advocacy. Despite immense suffering, the protagonist emerges as a survivor and advocate, determined to expose abuses, help other women, and fight for justice and dignity. Cultural and legal barriers. The narrative highlights the legal and cultural obstacles that prevent women from escaping abuse or protecting their children, especially in patriarchal societies. Hope and redemption. Ultimately, the novel is a testament to the power of hope, the possibility of redemption, and the enduring strength of the human spirit in the face of overwhelming adversity. These themes are woven throughout the protagonist's journey, making the novel both a searing indictment of injustice and a powerful story of survival and transformation. Main characters. Susan Peterson/Irshad Alshamari, protagonist. Resilient, survives years of abuse, violence, and loss across multiple countries. Courageous, risks her life repeatedly to protect her children and challenge oppressive systems. Loving and sacrificial, her identity as a mother drives her to endure unimaginable suffering for her children's safety. Adaptable, undergoes profound religious, cultural, and personal transformations, converts to Islam, adopts a new identity, and later reclaims her original faith. Morally driven, maintains a strong sense of right and wrong, questioning and resisting harmful practices even at great personal risk. Empathetic, her suffering deepens her compassion for other women and children, fueling her activism. Advocate, emerges as a voice for the oppressed, using her story to fight for women's rights and expose abuses. Mustafa Alshamari, Susan's husband. Zealous, deeply religious, increasingly radicalized, and involved with jihadist groups. Controlling, isolates Susan from her family and friends, enforces strict religious practices. Abusive, engages in domestic violence, polygamy, and upholds patriarchal authority. Manipulative, uses religious teachings to justify his actions. Aisha, Susan and Mustafa's eldest daughter. Victimized, forced into child marriage and subjected to abuse, reflecting the generational cycle of oppression. Innocent, her suffering highlights the vulnerability of children in extremist environments. Resilient, despite trauma, her story becomes part of her mother's advocacy. Mustafa's uncle. Authoritative, wields significant power in Saudi society, upholds and enforces strict religious and cultural norms. Patriarchal, intervenes in family matters, supports polygamy and child marriage. Unyielding, represents the entrenched, traditional authority that resists change. Mullah Muhammad Abu Hamid, Taliban leader. Fanatical, senior Taliban figure, embodies the dangers of unchecked religious authority. Abusive, becomes the guardian and abuser of Susan's children after Mustafa's disappearance. Manipulative, uses religious texts to justify violence and control. Predatory, exploits his position for personal gratification and power. Nadia Noor, Susan's ally. Parallel journey, an American woman who also converts to Islam and marries a jihadist, mirroring Susan's path. Supportive, becomes a close friend and ally to Susan, sharing in her struggle to escape. Courageous, fights to reclaim her life and identity after enduring similar abuses. Empathetic, her shared experience with Susan strengthens their bond and mutual support. Frank and Mary Peterson, Susan's parents. Loving, provide a supportive and nurturing home in Australia. Principled, strong Christian values, initially oppose Susan's choices out of concern. Forgiving, ultimately become a source of reconciliation and support after Susan's ordeal. Susan's children. Innocent victims, caught between cultures, faiths, and violence, their safety is the driving force behind Susan's actions. Symbolic, represent the stakes of the struggle, future generations at risk of repeating cycles of abuse or finding hope and freedom. How Susan meets Mustafa. Susan Peterson meets Mustafa Alshamari while she is a university student in Sydney, Australia. Susan, raised in a loving Christian family, is fascinated by foreign cultures and dreams of a diplomatic career. During her time at university, she encounters many international students, including those from the Middle East. Initially, Susan is interested in learning about Chinese culture, but after a failed relationship with a Chinese student, she shifts her focus to Arabic language and Middle Eastern culture. Susan meets Mustafa, a Saudi student who had come to Sydney as a refugee with his family. Mustafa's family fled Saudi Arabia due to religious persecution, and he presents himself as a deeply religious and principled young man. Susan is drawn to his politeness, his accent, and his devotion. Their friendship grows as Susan learns Arabic and studies Islam, and she is captivated by Mustafa's selective presentation of his faith as peaceful and tolerant. Over time, Susan falls deeply in love with Mustafa, and despite her family's objections, she converts to Islam and marries him, setting in motion the dramatic and challenging journey that defines the rest of her life. Mustafa's background and family situation. Mustafa al-Shamari, the central male figure in the novel, is portrayed as a deeply religious Saudi Muslim who becomes the husband of the protagonist, Susan Peterson, later Ershad. Mustafa's family history is marked by political and religious turmoil. His father, Sheikh al-Shamari, was affiliated with the banned Islamic group known as the Muslim Brotherhood, which led to severe persecution by the Saudi authorities. Because of his opposition to the strict Wahhabi doctrine of the Saudi royal family, Mustafa's father was forced to flee Saudi Arabia, leaving his wife, Zainab bint Mahmud, and their children behind. During the 5 years of separation, Sheikh al-Shamari was involved in various terrorist activities across Jordan, Lebanon, Iraq, Syria, and Israel, even boasting about his participation in the bombing of the U.S. Embassy in Beirut in 1983. Eventually, he was killed by Israeli soldiers on the border between Israel and Lebanon, leaving his wife a widow with 8 young children to raise alone in a foreign country. Mustafa's mother, Zainab, managed to escape Saudi Arabia with her children by pretending to be Lebanese and joining a refugee camp in Amman, Jordan. After years of hardship, the family was resettled in Australia. Mustafa, the eldest son, was 19 years old when they arrived in Sydney. He had already been heavily influenced by his father's religious and political beliefs, attending mosque regularly and associating with individuals connected to his father's past. Mustafa's family is large and close-knit, with siblings including Taha, Yasin, Khadija, Aisha, and Salama, Safia, and Mujahid. The family's experience of displacement, trauma, and religious radicalization profoundly shapes Mustafa's worldview and his later relationship with Susan/Ershad. His upbringing in a household marked by loss, ideological fervor, and the struggle for survival in exile contributes to his rigid adherence to religious doctrine and his eventual involvement in extremist circles. Susan's background and family situation. Susan Peterson, the protagonist of the novel, is born and raised in Sydney, Australia, to a loving and deeply religious Christian family. Her father, Frank Peterson, holds a senior position in a large import-export company, while her mother, Mary Peterson, is a high school teacher. Susan has an older brother named John. The Peterson family is portrayed as supportive and dedicated, investing their time and resources to provide Susan and her brother with a proper education and upbringing. Susan grows up in a nurturing environment, dreaming of becoming a diplomat and working abroad, which fuels her fascination with foreign languages and cultures. During her university years, Susan's curiosity about other cultures leads her to interact with international students, particularly from China and the Middle East. She initially becomes involved with a Chinese student, resulting in a brief romantic relationship that ends in disappointment when she discovers his intentions are more about gaining citizenship than genuine affection. This relationship results in an unplanned pregnancy. Susan wishes to have an abortion, but her parents, guided by their Christian beliefs, oppose it. Ultimately, her parents agree to raise the child, allowing Susan to continue her education. After returning to university, Susan shifts her focus to learning Arabic and Middle Eastern culture. Her academic advisor encourages her to study Islam and the Arabic language, which leads her to enroll in religious studies. Susan's openness to new experiences and her desire to understand different cultures set the stage for her meeting with Mustafa, a Saudi immigrant student. This encounter marks the beginning of a transformative and tumultuous journey that will take her far from her Australian roots. Susan's family situation is characterized by strong familial bonds, Christian values, and a commitment to education and personal growth. However, her choices, particularly her relationships and eventual conversion to Islam, create significant tension and heartbreak within her family, especially as she becomes increasingly isolated from them after marrying Mustafa and moving abroad. After Susan, who becomes Ershad after her conversion to Islam, marries Mustafa, their relationship quickly transforms from one of passionate love and idealism to a deeply troubled and oppressive union. Initially, Susan is captivated by Mustafa's piety, politeness, and the sense of purpose he projects. She is willing to sacrifice her family, faith, and identity to be with him, believing she has found her soulmate and spiritual guide. However, after their marriage and move to Saudi Arabia, Susan's reality shifts dramatically. Mustafa becomes increasingly controlling, jealous, and emotionally volatile. He enforces strict religious rules, isolates her from her family and friends, and demands complete obedience. Susan is required to adopt conservative Islamic dress, abandon her previous lifestyle, and submit to Mustafa's authority in all aspects of life. The marriage is marked by Mustafa's dominance, emotional abuse, and, at times, physical violence. He uses religious texts to justify his actions and expects Susan to conform without question. As their life progresses, especially after relocating to Afghanistan, the relationship deteriorates further. Mustafa's involvement with extremist groups and his growing radicalism put Susan and their children in constant danger. She endures repeated trauma, including forced pregnancies, loss of autonomy, and the threat of violence both inside and outside the home. Despite her suffering, Susan's love for her children becomes her anchor, and she repeatedly tries to protect them and seek a way out of her oppressive circumstances. In summary, Susan's relationship with Mustafa after marriage is characterized by a tragic shift from love and hope to control, abuse, and survival, reflecting the broader themes of the novel about the dangers of fanaticism, the loss of personal freedom, and the resilience of the human spirit. In the novel For the Sake of My Children by Dr. A. Ahmed, the ideal Muslim wife is depicted through the expectations placed on Susan, who becomes Irshad after her conversion to Islam and marriage to Mustafa. According to the narrative, the ideal Muslim wife is expected to be completely obedient to her husband. She must submit to his authority in all matters, including religious practice, dress, and social interactions. Modest in appearance and behavior, she is required to wear Islamic dress, such as the abaya and niqab, avoid perfume, and refrain from any behavior that could attract male attention. Devout in religious practice, she must perform daily prayers, recite the Quran, and participate in religious gatherings with other Muslim women, even if she does not fully understand the language or meaning. Submissive and self-sacrificing, her own desires, ambitions, and even her ties to her family and former faith are expected to be secondary to her husband's wishes and the demands of her new religious identity. Restricted in autonomy, she cannot travel, work, or socialize freely without her husband's permission or the presence of a male guardian, mahram. Sexually available, she is expected to fulfill her husband's sexual desires on demand, as justified by religious texts cited in the novel, and refusal is met with religious condemnation. Accepting of polygamy and patriarchal norms, she must accept her husband's right to marry additional wives and is discouraged from questioning or resisting these practices. These expectations are enforced through religious teachings, social pressure, and, in Susan's case, emotional and physical abuse. The novel presents these ideals critically, highlighting the suffering and loss of identity that Susan experiences as she tries to conform to them. Susan's Irshad's challenges adapting to the ideal wife role. 1. Loss of autonomy and identity. She is suffering from a strong suicidal mood. She is deeply immersed in her suicidal thoughts. She tried many times to end her life, but she was always prevented by the fear of leaving her children orphans and begging for food on the streets of Kandahar city. If it is not for her children, she would have shot herself in the head and ended it all and got out of her hellish life in the Muslim world. 2. Strict religious and social expectations. Irshad is obligated to dress and behave like a well-mannered Muslim girl. She bought an Islamic dress that covered her body from head to toe, except for her face and a small part of her hands. Her Saudi lover told her that the Quran commands all Muslim women to wear the veil. The white girl was also forbidden to wear shirts, pants or slacks, and any short dresses. Of course, Irshad is now completely forbidden from wearing a bikini or visiting any pool or beach. She is not supposed to do any physical sports such as basketball, football, volleyball, running, swimming, or going to the gym. She is also forbidden to shake hands with men. 3. Emotional and physical abuse. The first fight between the newlywed couple and lovers took place on the first wedding night. The Saudi groom became furious and nearly divorced his Australian bride when he found out she was not a virgin. Irshad begged him to forgive her and accept her as his wife. Despite this, Mustafa refused to pardon her until he consulted the imam of the mosque. 4. Isolation and cultural displacement. The Australian woman found herself imprisoned in the four corners of her apartment in Dammam City, in the Islamic Kingdom of Tartarus. She cannot go out without her Arab husband. There is no entertainment in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. The entire kingdom has no cinemas, public parks, beaches, swimming pools, nightclubs, bars, or liquor stores. The Australian wife can go out with her Saudi husband once or twice a month and go to the supermarket, which is a few meters away from her apartment. 5. Witnessing and enduring gender-based violence. Another ceremony that the foreign wife and her Arab husband must attend is the circumcision of young boys and the female genital mutilation or amputation of the sexual organs of young girls. This sinister procedure must be performed as soon as the child reaches the age of 4 or 5. The Australian wife knows that female genital mutilation is an abuse and a crime against a Muslim girl, but whenever she protests against it, her husband silences her through the hadith of the Prophet. 6. Conflict between personal values and imposed beliefs. Although living with Mustafa proved to Irshad that he was neither a saint nor an angel, she remained faithful to him and true to her Islamic faith. One way or another, she has ignored all the abuses that Muslim women are subjected to in the Islamic community. She has always convinced herself that the unbeatable problem is not in the Quran and the hadiths of the Prophet, but rather in the interpretations of those divine texts. These quotes vividly illustrate the emotional, psychological, and physical challenges Susan faces as she tries to adapt to the role of the ideal wife in a restrictive and patriarchal environment. Irshad, formerly Susan, faces severe hardships while performing the Hajj pilgrimage with her husband Mustafa and their 2 children. The journey, which she initially hopes will be a spiritual experience, quickly becomes a harrowing ordeal marked by physical, emotional, and psychological suffering. Summary of hardships. Extreme physical discomfort. The family arrives in Saudi Arabia during the peak of summer, with temperatures soaring to 48 to 55 degrees Celsius, 118 to 131 degrees Fahrenheit. Irshad and her children struggle to cope with the oppressive heat, and she nearly faints from exhaustion and dehydration upon arrival. The crowded conditions at the airport and during the pilgrimage rituals make movement nearly impossible, adding to her distress. Sexual harassment and violation. Irshad is subjected to repeated sexual harassment by male pilgrims in the crowded spaces of the airport and during the Hajj rituals. She experiences unwanted physical contact, including groping and even finding semen on her clothing after being pressed against strangers in the crowd. These incidents leave her feeling violated, helpless, and deeply traumatized. Lack of privacy and safety. The lack of gender segregation during the Hajj rituals exposes Irshad to further harassment. She is unable to protect herself or her children from the chaos and the predatory behavior of some men in the crowds. Even her husband is unable to shield her from the constant violations. Cultural and religious shock. Irshad is shocked by the reality of the pilgrimage, which starkly contrasts with the idealized version she had been taught. She witnesses and endures conditions that are unsanitary, dangerous, and dehumanizing, especially for women. The rituals themselves, as described in the novel, are depicted as chaotic and perilous, with frequent reports of injuries, stampedes, and even deaths among pilgrims. Health crisis. The physical and emotional toll of the pilgrimage leads to a severe health crisis for Irshad. She collapses from heat stroke and is hospitalized for weeks, suffering from a life-threatening illness that leaves her incapacitated and dependent on others for survival. Her husband is more concerned with completing the rituals than her well-being, further compounding her sense of abandonment and despair. Isolation and despair. Throughout the ordeal, Ershad feels isolated, unsupported, and trapped in a situation where her safety and dignity are constantly at risk. The experience deepens her sense of alienation from her husband and the society around her, reinforcing the novel's themes of gender-based oppression and the struggle for autonomy. In summary, Ershad's experience of Hajj is not one of spiritual fulfillment, but of profound suffering, marked by physical hardship, sexual harassment, cultural disillusionment, and a near-fatal health crisis. The pilgrimage becomes a powerful symbol of the broader challenges she faces as a woman navigating a patriarchal and often hostile environment. Here's a detailed comparison of Zaina's bitter Hajj rituals experiences and Ershad's hardships during the Hajj rituals. 1. Zaina's Hajj experience. Zaina is a Western convert to Islam who describes her Hajj pilgrimage as the most horrific and immoral experience a Muslim woman can go through in her life. Her account is quoted in the novel as a first-hand testimony and is used to highlight the chaos, unsanitary conditions, and dangers faced by women during Hajj. Extreme overcrowding. Zaina describes the Grand Mosque as so packed that there was no place to perform the pilgrimage in peace. There was not even enough place to breathe fresh air. There was a sea of people, dirty public bathrooms, and toilets full of feces and urine, and on top of that people slept in those places, ate food, and exposed their young to those unsanitary conditions. Lack of hygiene and safety. She is shocked by the filth, the lack of privacy, and the exposure of children to disease and danger. Aggressive behavior and stampedes. Zaina witnesses people being trampled to death during the tawaf, circling the Kaaba, with others jumping on their corpses without any sense of guilt. Sexual harassment. She describes being pressed and crushed in the crowd, feeling physically violated, and seeing men behave aggressively and selfishly. Emotional trauma. Zaina is left pale, shaking, nauseous, and dizzy, her dreams of a spiritual experience shattered by what she calls selfishness, extreme filth, extreme cruelty, aggressiveness, and insane behaviors. Summary judgment. She concludes that it is a violation of human rights to allow more than 2 million people, including young children, to gather together in the name of performing the religious ritual called Hajj, subject to death, looting, stealing, injury, and exposure to various forms of violence and many kinds of aggression. 2. Ershad's Hajj experience. Ershad, formerly Susan Peterson, undergoes the Hajj pilgrimage with her Saudi husband Mustafa and their children. Her experience is similarly harrowing, but the novel provides even more detail about the personal and physical suffering she endures. Extreme physical discomfort. Ershad and her children arrive during the peak of summer, with temperatures soaring to 48 to 55 degrees Celsius, 118 to 131 degrees Fahrenheit. She nearly faints from exhaustion and dehydration, and the crowded conditions make movement nearly impossible. Sexual harassment and violation. Ershad is repeatedly sexually harassed by male pilgrims in the crowded spaces of the airport and during the Hajj rituals. She experiences unwanted physical contact, including groping and even finding semen on her clothing after being pressed against strangers in the crowd. These incidents leave her feeling violated, helpless, and deeply traumatized. Lack of privacy and safety. The lack of gender segregation during the Hajj rituals exposes Ershad to further harassment. She is unable to protect herself or her children from the chaos and the predatory behavior of some men in the crowds. Even her husband is unable to shield her from the constant violations. Cultural and religious shock. Ershad is shocked by the reality of the pilgrimage, which starkly contrasts with the idealized version she had been taught. She witnesses and endures conditions that are unsanitary, dangerous, and dehumanizing, especially for women. The rituals themselves are depicted as chaotic and perilous, with frequent reports of injuries, stampedes, and even deaths among pilgrims. Health crisis. The physical and emotional toll of the pilgrimage leads to a severe health crisis for Irshad. She collapses from heat stroke and is hospitalized for weeks, suffering from a life-threatening illness that leaves her incapacitated and dependent on others for survival. Her husband is more concerned with completing the rituals than her well-being, further compounding her sense of abandonment and despair. Isolation and despair. Throughout the ordeal, Irshad feels isolated, unsupported, and trapped in a situation where her safety and dignity are constantly at risk. The experience deepens her sense of alienation from her husband and the society around her, reinforcing the novel's themes of gender-based oppression and the struggle for autonomy. Summary. Irshad's experience of Hajj is not one of spiritual fulfillment, but of profound suffering, marked by physical hardship, sexual harassment, cultural disillusionment, and a near-fatal health crisis. The pilgrimage becomes a powerful symbol of the broader challenges she faces as a woman navigating a patriarchal and often hostile environment. 3. Comparison table. Aspect. Zaina's experience. Irshad's experience. Physical hardship. Extreme overcrowding, unsanitary conditions. Extreme heat, exhaustion, dehydration, hospitalization. Sexual harassment. Pressed, crushed, physically violated in crowds. Groped, harassed, semen on clothing, repeated trauma. Emotional impact. Shock, nausea, emotional trauma, shattered dreams. Trauma, despair, sense of abandonment, isolation. Cultural disillusion. Disgust at filth, chaos, lack of humanity. Disillusionment with religious ideals versus reality. Health consequences. Nausea, dizziness, emotional breakdown. Heat stroke, severe illness, weeks in hospital. Support system. None. Feels alone and unsafe. Husband indifferent, family support absent. Summary judgment. Violation of human rights, calls for reform. Pilgrimage as symbol of oppression and suffering. 4. Conclusion. Both Zaina and Irshad's Hajj experiences are depicted as traumatic and dehumanizing, especially for women. While Zaina's account is an outsider's shocked testimony, Irshad's is a deeply personal narrative of physical, emotional, and psychological suffering. Both accounts serve to critique the realities of the Hajj pilgrimage as experienced by women, exposing issues of sexual harassment, lack of safety, and the failure of the ritual to provide the spiritual fulfillment it promises. The novel uses these parallel experiences to highlight the broader themes of gender oppression, cultural disillusionment, and the resilience required to survive in such environments. Here's a focused comparison of how the Hajj experiences affect the character development of Zaina and Irshad based on the content of the novel. Zaina's Hajj experience and character development. Zaina is presented as a Western convert to Islam whose testimony about Hajj is quoted in the novel. Her experience is one of profound shock, disillusionment, and emotional trauma. Disillusionment. Zaina's expectations of a spiritual, uplifting pilgrimage are shattered by the reality of filth, chaos, aggression, and danger. She is horrified by the lack of humanity and the suffering she witnesses, especially among women and children. Emotional impact. The experience leaves her pale, shaking, nauseous, and deeply disturbed. Her dreams of spiritual fulfillment are replaced by trauma and a sense of violation. Critical awareness. Rather than deepening her faith, the Hajj experience prompts Zaina to question the system and the treatment of women. She calls the event a violation of human rights and urges others not to look away from the suffering she witnessed. Transformation. Zaina's character is marked by a loss of innocence and a new, critical perspective. She moves from idealism to activism, using her voice to expose the realities of Hajj and advocate for change. Her experience becomes a catalyst for her to speak out, challenge injustice, and encourage others to do the same. Irshad's Hajj experience and character development. Irshad, formerly Susan Peterson, undergoes Hajj with her Saudi husband and children. Her experience is even more personal and transformative. Physical and emotional trauma. Irshad endures extreme heat, exhaustion, sexual harassment, and a near-fatal health crisis, heat stroke, and hospitalization. She feels isolated, unsupported, and violated, both physically and emotionally. Loss of agency. The ordeal reinforces her sense of powerlessness and deepens her alienation from her husband and the society around her. Her suffering is compounded by her husband's indifference to her well-being. Shattering of illusions. Like Zaina, Irshad's idealized vision of Hajj is destroyed. The pilgrimage, which she hoped would be spiritually meaningful, becomes a symbol of her oppression and the dangers faced by women in patriarchal societies. Catalyst for change. The trauma of Hajj is a turning point in Irshad's character arc. It intensifies her longing for freedom and safety for herself and her children. The experience strengthens her resolve to resist, seek escape, and ultimately fight for her children's future. Deepening empathy and activism. Irshad's suffering during Hajj is not just personal, it fuels her empathy for other women and her later activism. Her ordeal becomes part of her testimony as she transforms from a victim into a survivor and advocate for women's rights. Comparative table. Impact on character development. Aspect. Zaina. Irshad. Initial attitude. Hopeful, idealistic, seeking spiritual growth. Hopeful, seeking spiritual meaning and family unity. Experience. Shock, disgust, trauma, disillusionment. Trauma, illness, violation, abandonment. Emotional result. Disillusionment, anger, critical awareness. Despair, alienation, loss of agency. Transformation. Becomes a vocal critic, activist, truth-teller. Becomes more determined, resilient, empathetic, and ultimately an advocate for women and children. Long-term impact. Uses her voice to challenge injustice. Uses her suffering as fuel for activism and escape. Her Hajj trauma is a key step in her journey from victim to survivor. Summary. Zaina's Hajj experience is a catalyst for her transformation from an idealistic convert to a critical, outspoken advocate. The trauma she endures leads her to activism and a commitment to exposing injustice. Irshad's Hajj experience is a pivotal moment in her journey from compliance and hope to resistance and advocacy. The suffering she endures deepens her empathy, strengthens her resolve, and becomes a foundational part of her later activism and fight for her children. Both women's character development is profoundly shaped by the trauma and disillusionment of Hajj, but while Zaina's transformation is outwardly critical and activist, Irshad's is more deeply personal, fueling her journey from victimhood to empowered survivor and advocate. During the Hajj pilgrimage, Irshad, formerly Susan, faces a severe health crisis that leads to her hospitalization. The extreme heat of the Saudi summer, combined with the physical and emotional strain of performing the rituals, causes her to collapse from heat stroke. She is diagnosed with a severe form of meningitis, referred to as al-Sihai in Arabic, which results from the heat stroke and leads to significant damage to her spinal cord and brain. The illness is so serious that doctors warn she may lose her mental faculties and become like a vegetable if she survives. Irshad spends 3 weeks in intensive care in a hospital in Mecca and later is transferred to the Royal Hospital in Riyadh for further treatment. Due to the high cost of the necessary surgeries and her husband's inability to pay, she is eventually discharged from the hospital while still gravely ill, and her recovery is slow and uncertain. During Irshad's, Susan's, recovery after her severe illness during the Hajj pilgrimage, family support played a crucial, though complicated role. After she was discharged from the Royal Hospital in Riyadh due to her husband Mustafa's inability to pay for further surgeries, the family was left in a desperate financial and emotional situation. Mustafa reached out to his relatives in Saudi Arabia, who managed to collect some money and invited the family to stay with them in Dammam. There, Irshad, still gravely ill and often in a coma or semi-conscious state, was cared for by Mustafa's uncle's first wife, who was tasked with nursing Irshad and looking after her children, despite her own reluctance and resentment at having a sick foreign woman in her home. Mustafa's relatives could not provide the full amount needed for advanced medical care, but their support, offering shelter, basic care, and some financial help, was essential for Irshad's survival. Over 6 months, with the help of local doctors and the persistence of her extended family, Irshad slowly regained consciousness, learned to walk and talk again, and eventually recovered enough to care for herself and her children. However, the support she received was often tinged with cultural tension, reluctance, and the burden placed on the women of the household, reflecting the complex dynamics of family obligation and social expectation in her new environment. Mustafa refuses to return with Irshad, Susan, to Australia and insists that she can return alone, without their children, because of a combination of personal, cultural, and ideological reasons rooted in his identity and beliefs. After Irshad's long illness and recovery in Saudi Arabia, she pleads with Mustafa to keep his promise and return with her and their children to Sydney, Australia. However, Mustafa has undergone a significant transformation since returning to his homeland. He feels a deep sense of belonging and happiness in Saudi Arabia, which he never experienced in Australia. Being back among his people and Islamic culture, Mustafa becomes more content, social, and rooted in his identity. This change is so profound that Irshad notices he is like a different person, happier, and more engaged with his community. Mustafa's attachment to his homeland and culture leads him to make a firm decision. He wants to live permanently in Saudi Arabia and raise his children there, according to his values and traditions. He tells Irshad plainly that if she does not want to stay, she can return to Australia alone, but he and their children will remain. He refuses to let the children leave with her, as he believes their proper upbringing and future are tied to growing up in a Muslim country, not in what he sees as the land of the infidels. This reflects his conviction that his children should be raised within Islamic society and not be influenced by Western values. Irshad is devastated by this ultimatum, as she cannot bear the thought of leaving her children behind. Mustafa's insistence is absolute, and he ignores her pleas and tears, prioritizing his own sense of identity and the future he envisions for his children over Irshad's wishes and their previous promises. Irshad, formerly Susan Peterson, refuses to return to her home country, Australia, without her children because her entire sense of purpose and survival is tied to their well-being and future. Throughout the story, Irshad endures extreme hardship, abuse, and danger in Saudi Arabia, Afghanistan, and other places, but her love for her children and her fear for their fate in oppressive, violent environments are what keep her from abandoning them. Here are the main reasons, based on the text. 1. Maternal love and responsibility. Irshad's identity and motivation are deeply rooted in her role as a mother. She repeatedly states that her children are the only reason she endures her suffering and does not end her life. She fears that if she leaves, her children will be left as orphans, forced to beg on the streets, or be raised in environments that will harm them physically and psychologically. 2. Fear for her children's future. Irshad is haunted by the idea that, if left behind, her sons will be indoctrinated and become terrorists, and her daughters will be forced into child marriage and subjected to abuse. She believes that in Australia, her children would have access to care, education, and a chance to grow up as good citizens, whereas in Afghanistan or Saudi Arabia, their futures would be bleak and dangerous. 3. Legal and cultural barriers. Irshad faces significant legal and cultural obstacles that prevent her from easily taking her children with her. For example, in Saudi Arabia and Afghanistan, a mother cannot obtain passports for her children or travel without the father's consent. She is also not allowed to travel without a male guardian, mahram, making escape nearly impossible without risking severe punishment. 4. Desperation and sacrifice. Even when offered the chance to escape alone, Irshad refuses, stating that she cannot bear the thought of leaving her children behind to suffer or be raised in a society she sees as abusive and oppressive. She is willing to risk her own life and freedom and even contemplates suicide, but is always stopped by the thought of her children's fate. 5. Repeated attempts and setbacks. Irshad makes multiple attempts to seek help from embassies and international organizations, but is repeatedly told that, without the father's consent, she cannot take her children out of the country. Despite these setbacks, she continues to search for any possible way to escape with her children, demonstrating her unwavering commitment to them. In summary, Irshad's refusal to return to her country without her children is a central theme of the novel, highlighting her maternal devotion, her fear for their safety and future, and the immense legal and cultural barriers she faces. Her children are her only reason for enduring unimaginable suffering, and she is determined to protect them at any cost.